In this episode, VJ Days Transports, Victory-class cargo ships. During World War II, the press, enraptured by the scale of the Lend-Lease program, wrote that Liberty-class transports carried in their holds another cargo, the most important one, victory. It is true, but these vessels became famous first of all thanks to the outstanding performance and standardization of the US industry and the courage of their multinational crews. As for the Liberties themselves, they were quite old-fashioned steamships, designed for a 5-year operation cycle. US shipbuilders closely studied the experience of their use in the first half of World War II, and in 1943, they created the project of a new mass transport for wartime.
When developing the Victory ships, US engineers were already thinking about the outcome of the war and the post-war period. That's why they took the Liberty vessel, improved it, and built Victory-class cargo liners. They were reliable, spacious, and remained in service until the mid-1990s.
The project for transports of a new type was developed by Bethlehem, the biggest US shipbuilding company. And on April 28, 1943, it received a resounding name, Victory. However, the mass production of these vessels began only 9 months later, because the War Industries Board, which controlled the US industry, required time to organize the production of a sufficient number of engines for them.
This particular vessel is Red Oak Victory. She's moored in Richmond, California.
General specifications of the Victory-class cargo ship Red Oak. Length, 139 meters. Beam, 19 meters. Draft, 8.5 meters. Displacement, 15,200 tons. Tonnage, 10,850 tons.
The two main differences were that the Victories were about 1,000 tons heavier, and they had a steam turbine engine giving them an extra 6 knots or so of speed. Allows a little bit more survivability against torpedoes.
Armament, one dual-purpose Mark 12 gun with a caliber of 127 millimeters, one dual-purpose gun with a caliber of 76 millimeters.
The 3-inch 50 is only the middleweight gun on the Victory class, an excellent dual-purpose weapon found on pretty much most naval ships in World War II for the US. It's arguably one of the best guns of the war. This would have been a significant threat, particularly to surface submarines.
8 20mm Oerlikon anti-aircraft cannons.
Behind me you can see one of the Oerlikon 20mm cannons. This was an outstanding weapon that would have seen service pretty much all over the world. It was a dual-purpose gun, primarily used for anti-aircraft defense, although it could be used against any small raider such as a torpedo boat which may happen to be encountered. Red Oak Victory would have carried 8 of these, 4 on each side.
Cruise speed, 15 knots with a power plant of 6,000 HP, or 17 knots with a power plant of 8,500 HP. Crew, 62 merchant fleet sailors and 28 Navy sailors. Cruising range, 23,500 miles. Engineers tried to keep the Victory project as close to the Liberty design as possible to preserve the technological effectiveness of mass production at US shipyards.
Well, they did a lot of prefabrication, and so a lot of it was built, in sections. And then what they did is they put the sections together. In other words, it just wasn't one at a time. They're building different sections in different parts of the shipyard.
Nevertheless, the new transport turned out to be quite recognizable. A forecastle, tall smokestack, and 3 cargo masts with wide cross trees. They allowed for installation of quite powerful electric cranes and hoists that enabled Victories to carry out loading and unloading of their holds independently. Apart from that, the hull lines were changed, which, together with more powerful engines, resulted in a higher speed. The ship's structure was also improved. A greater distance between bulkheads allowed engineers to make the hull less rigid and avoid the deformation that liberties were vulnerable to in rough seas. The first Victory-class transport began service in March 1944. However, only 15 vessels of this class were commissioned in the first 6 months. The main bulk of Victory ships were built when the war in Europe was near its end, and the battle for the Atlantic was won by the Allies. That's why none of the new transports fell prey to German U-boats. It's no accident, though, that 5 out of the 6 shipyards that built Victories were located on the west coast of the US. These cargo vessels became a crucial part of a colossal supply machine that provided US troops in the Pacific region with everything necessary to successfully wage war. Flotillas of Victory ships made up entire mobile supply bases for the Army and Navy at deserted Pacific atolls. In total, 531 Victory-class ships were built in the US during the war. They were the biggest series of line cargo ships in the 20th century. According to calculations by US historians, during the Pacific War, 1 ton of cargo was required to supply 1 soldier with a monthly ration of food, medicine, fuel, and ammunition. The Americans built such a large number of Victories that they could provide a monthly allowance to an army of 5.7 million people, the same number of people in the Soviet armed forces, including the Air Force and Navy, when Germany attacked the USSR on June 22, 1941. The first ship received the name United Victory, and the following 33 ships were named after the Allied countries fighting against the Axis powers. 218 vessels were named after small US cities. For example, Red Oak Victory got her name from a town in Iowa that suffered the heaviest losses per head among all US towns in World War II. The following 150 ships were named after US colleges and universities. The names of the few remaining transports were quite random, but they all contained the word victory. "117 more Victories were commissioned as Haskell-class attack transports.
They were classic attack transports of the US Navy. Apart from being loaded with troops and vehicles, they carried landing crafts of different types to participate in landing operations. Every ship of this class could transport up to 1,500 troops with armament, vehicles, and equipment. Thus, 2 attack transports like this could carry an entire regiment of US Marines of the World War II era.
Soon after Victory, the US Navy carried out the last major operation of World War II, Operation Magic Carpet, aimed at bringing home millions of American soldiers fighting overseas. Not only did all Haskell-class attack transports take part in it, but so did 97 Victory ships, whose cargo holds were converted to accommodate the troops returning home. In the second half of the 1940s, 170 vessels were sold to private shipping companies, where they made up the core of the US merchant fleet, just like the project's creators had planned. Several dozen transports were transferred to the US Army's supply service, and the rest were sent to the reserve fleet and mothballed. The last of them was stricken from the reserve fleet in only 2010. However, the Cold War began, and the service of Victory ships was required again. 36 transports of this class participated in the Korean War, while 100 of them were recommissioned during the Vietnam War. In August 1966, Baton Rouge Victory was severely damaged by a mine laid by Viet Cong combatants at the exit of Saigon's port.
In 1950, North Korean troops defeated the South Korean army, and an enormous number of refugees fled towards the only free port, Busan. One of the Victory ships, Red Oak Victory, had arrived there, saving people from approaching North Korean troops, The vessel took 14,000 refugees on board. 14,000 refugees. What does that mean from a shipbuilding point of view? The vessel could have capsized any moment because its carrying capacity was seriously exceeded. They consciously took this risk, a tremendous risk, and saved those 14,000 people. They ferried them to Georgia Island to safety.
3 Victory-class vessels survived. They are preserved in the US as museums. Red Oak Victory was commissioned on December 5, 1944, and was one of 10 transports of this class specially equipped to deliver artillery ammunition. At the final stage of the Pacific War, Red Oak Victory served in the 10th Squadron of Material and Technical Support based at the Eniwetok Atoll and the Philippines, where she supplied US warships fighting through to Japan. After the war, the transport was assigned to the Reserve Fleet in California, but she was recommissioned several times when it was necessary. She delivered cargo to US troops in Korea between 1950 and 1953, and in Vietnam from 1966 to 1968. Red Oak Victory was decorated with 8 medals for her service. In 1993, the ship was going to be scrapped, but the Richmond Museum Association solicited before the US Congress for the transfer of the ship to the local history museum. 5 years later, Red Oak Victory became a part of the National Historical Park, dedicated to the work of the US military industry during World War II. She's one of the last modest workers of war who crossed the oceans to bring victory in her cargo holds.